50 bikes in East New York and Brownsville for folks in the high COVID diagnosis area, primarily people of color, to make sure that they had access to self-propelled transportation that would help them prevent being on buses and crowded spaces where they're more apt to have contracted COVID. So thank you to everyone who was involved in that volunteer effort, everyone who contributed dollars to help us purchase the things we needed to do it. And tonight you are here with me to learn a bit more about civic engagement and the public outreach process that's involved in getting bike lanes into your neighborhood, wherever you are in New York City. I want to make sure we're recording this because there are people who are from outside of New York City who are very eager to have participated. So if I can get my assistant, you'll see Kristen Phillips and occasionally hear her voice chime in. Kristen will be helping us with the chat box this evening. We are here to learn about how does outreach happen. We are not soliciting today suggestions for where bike lanes should go or complaints about bike lanes that exist or that don't exist. We're here to figure out if you're going to dedicate yourself to participating in the opportunities that DOT is giving us to say where we think a bike lane should go, then we want to make sure that you have the right vocabulary and you have as much knowledge to be an efficient participant. So we have with us today, you'll see them on our screen. We have Calista DeJesus, who is also a citizen champion of the Flatbush Avenue bike lane, to share with you that it is possible to get a bike lane where you want it, and it just might take some time, right? We also have with us from the DOT, and this is a candid, chill conversation. I could not emphasize this enough to my colleagues. They're like, look, we have formal meetings all the time. We've been to those. Those aren't so exciting. So let's just be chill with each other after work and talk about how does the bike lane process go and do our voices really make a difference. So from the DOT bike unit, we have Zachary White, who is the bicycle intersection coordinator, and also the deputy of the bicycle unit, Sean Macias. So I'm going to ask these folks to unmute themselves and say hello. Starting with DOT folks, thank you so much for being the experts that you are. And then Calista, and then we'll give you, I promise, I told them we don't want to make this about presentations, so it's going to be a 5-minute presentation just to get us all grounded and on the same page so we have the vocabulary to understand each other. So, fellas, can you unmute yourselves or do you need me to do it?
Yep. Hello.
I think we got it.
Hello, everybody. Good evening.
Again, my name is Sean Macias, Deputy Director of the Bike Program at DOT. Thank you for allowing us to talk about our work tonight. Hoping to have a great, candid conversation. And I'll turn it over to Zach, who's going to run us through just a few slides here to start.
Yep. So I'm about to share my screen. Uh-oh, I have it showing the wrong slide immediately. Let me not do that. Okay. Yes. Okay. Okay, you can see that? Good.
We see it now.
Okay, so yeah, just some really short slides, just so.
Hey Zach.
Yes.
Can I interrupt you and get you to explain, because we were joking about this in our pre-meeting. Your title is the Bicycle Intersection Coordinator. Does that mean that you are Lord of Intersections? Can you tell us what you effectively do at DOT?
No, I'm not Lord of Intersections. So I usually don't introduce myself as that title, but it is my official work title. I usually just say I'm a project manager. So like if you ever see me at another community board meeting, I'm usually just presenting a project, but internally, I am more on the side of the engineering side, the design, the traffic modeling, because I have an engineering degree. So they made that title to kind of make me sound more technical. But at the end of the day, I do a lot of other things too. I do community outreach too. So, but that's why I have that title. And it's a fun title. I like it.
Is there any particular area that people might recognize you from project coordinating and making project presentations?
Well, community-wise, I worked a lot on the Bay Ridge stuff. I shouldn't word it that way. The Bay Ridge neighborhood bicycle network. I'm not wording that correctly, but I also like on the more technical intersection side. I helped out a lot with the protected intersection stuff as we were doing that a few years ago. If people have been following the program, the offset crossings, whatever version of words you're using to describe it. So, and also I've done a little bit of stuff with the bicycle green wave. That's not the green wave on this slide, but the timing of bicycles moving down the street, some of the stuff like that.
Right, making all the green lights so we could go. Yeah. Cheers. All right. Thank you for letting us know who we're dealing with. So tell us about what's happening in New York City in terms of the green wave. And just to give some context to this for everybody who's here. Part of the reason that I wanted to have this session is because there are going to be some very important neighborhood planning processes coming up for particularly Flatbush, East Flatbush, East New York, and Brownsville. And so the more that we know about how to interact with the process, the better we can make it. So take it away.
Yes. So that's the biggest draw that I want everyone to take away from this slide is that the bicycle unit, DOT, the city in general is starting to allot more and more resources to build out our bicycle network. So we have this sort of general plan for making protected lanes get to every neighborhood and making sure every neighborhood has a bicycle network to get around. And we're building pieces of it out even today, and we're doing more workshops in different communities. We looked at a lot of data. We looked at fatalities and injuries that we've been tracking for years and years, and we're trying to build up the network the best that we can. This includes a lot of outreach too, and it includes a lot of new designs for trying to better design around our neighborhoods and the different intersections. As you go to different parts of the city, things start to get more and more complex, and we want to make sure we're designing the best bike lane for everywhere. So that was this slide, just a short intro. At other community board meetings, you'll probably see a similar slide be shown over and over again because we're really trying to push that we're doing this work and making more and more bike lane mileage, especially protected bike lane mileage. So I'm saying protected a lot just to keep us all on the same page. We generally categorize bicycle lanes into 3 categories. We say protected lanes, which is you're behind some sort of thing, keeping you separated between the bike lane and traffic, moving vehicles. Then there's conventional lanes where it's just paint and you're right next to the moving vehicles of cars and trucks. And then shared lanes, which means that you're in the street with the car and the truck. And we try not to do that in a ton of places, especially now. And we tend to see it more as routing. But to flip back to the other side of the screen, on protected lanes, we have a bunch of different ways that we do protected lanes, which might also come up in this conversation. So we have a few pictures just to point out some versions. So already in this one, we have 2 things going on. We have the concrete barrier. The Jersey barrier protected is what we tend to use. And it's a very heavy structure. And then there's also 3 delineators here that are plastic and have reflectors on them. And then on the next slide, I have more things. So the other one, the general one that you see all over the city is the parking protected bicycle lanes, which means there's parked cars between you and the moving lane. Then we have quick curb, which is another sort of plastic barrier that has reflectors on it. And we tend to not put that for giant corridors. Like in this picture, you just see it at the intersection, but there are some places around the city where it's a whole stretch of the street. The other one is raised bicycle lanes or raised protected lanes, which just means that it's raised up. This tends to be more intense work. It's like really heavy construction. We have to change how the rain drains on the street usually. So you only see this on like much larger projects that take years of development and construction. And then the last thing is delineators, which are the plastic posts with the reflectors on top. They don't have a base like the quick curb, so makes them a little different. So yeah, those are the 3 slides.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So if you didn't already know, now you know, and we'll come back to these slides as necessary throughout the presentation if it helps with the conversation. So I would like Calista, go ahead and chime in. You are here because you're a real person who did a real thing with some bike lanes and DOT staff a couple of times. And Calista's actually the reason that I ended up going to a bike lane meeting. Like, I'm your bike mayor, but as I told the fellas, I'm like, I'm not bike Jesus. I can't be everywhere and know everything. So I've gone to a couple, like maybe 2 or 3 meetings where, and I mean community board meetings when I say meetings, where the presentation is about, please give us this bike lane, and ended up going to support Calista at our CB in Flatbush. And they gave up and finally let the bike lane go in. So Calista, tell us about how you got involved, what that process was like for you going in versus what it turned into. And yeah, just help us out.
Hello, everyone. So I'm a resident of Flatbush, and I pretty much used to ride to work by bike every day. A few years ago, around I started biking around 2009, and around 2012 or so, I had to work late nights, and oftentimes to get from Manhattan or downtown Brooklyn, I had to ride through Prospect Park to get to my neighborhood. And the thing is after a certain time at night, it's really dangerous, and I didn't feel comfortable riding through the park. So I thought to myself, it would be really nice if there was a bike lane on Flatbush Avenue, especially so that you wouldn't have to go through the park. Also, after a certain time, I think it was 1 a.m., the cops will ticket you if you're riding in the park. So a neighbor and I, Paco, we decided to push for a bike lane on Flatbush Avenue between Empire Boulevard and Grand Army Plaza. And it was a very long process, and it included multiple steps, but it did have a boost initially because Borough President Eric Adams was also in support of a bike lane on Flatbush. So we already had an elected official in a high place who had voiced support, and we milked that as much as we could. So I would say one of the first steps that we did, I was volunteering for Transportation Alternatives. They're an organization that is also involved in biking, pedestrian safety, et cetera, if you didn't already know. And they have a monthly activist committee meeting in each borough. So I was attending the Brooklyn Activist Committee meetings, and we were already working on another issue in our neighborhood on Rogers Avenue. It's like a speedway sometimes. So we had a group of neighbors who were already active about that, and we organized a neighborhood workshop, inviting everyone who, like promoting it everywhere and inviting our neighbors in the area to attend. And we pretty much had a table where we facilitated each major corridor in our neighborhood: Flatbush Avenue, Nostrand Avenue, Rogers, et cetera. And we had everyone move from table to table to identify, what areas they thought could use more safe infrastructure, what concerns that they had. And we had the highest feedback on Flatbush Avenue. And believe it or not, a lot of people, especially fellow cyclists, also thought that it would be a good idea to have a bike lane on that stretch. So that also helped. We were able to get more people involved, and we pretty much just tried to do as much outreach as possible in the community. We started a petition on change.org that got over 1,000 signatures. We shared that widely. It got media attention, and we did some interviews with some of the local news networks. And we also had meetings with elected officials like Matthew Jean, even though that went nowhere. We were
You,
still
you
trying
mean
to,
every political person is not going to be necessarily helpful to you if you reach out to them?
yeah, don't, it's not guaranteed, guys, but it doesn't hurt to try.
So all in all, Calista, from the time that you started to the time that the bike lane went in, what was that time frame?
Wow. Let's say we started around 2015 in the
Uh-huh.
advocacy. By the time that the bike lane was installed, it was like 2021. I think no,
Okay.
2020. I'm sorry, 2020. So
Right,
it
because we
took a good
celebrated last year.
5 to 6 years. So it's a long process. It can be very tedious. So you have to have patience, but just keep on top of your end goal, and you will get there. But it does it does take an incredible amount of time. And
All right.
DOT clear up for us why that process takes so long.
So I think that that's an excellent jumping into the meat of the conversation point, which is not every bike lane is going to take 5 to 6 years, thank goodness. But oftentimes people who are coming from the community and they're giving their input are just feeling like they're talking into a hole because they spoke in 2015 and what happened to their results. So Zach and Sean, let's talk about how do bike lanes happen and like why is it that some take so long and maybe some don't take as long? I know that there's supposed to be, in a perfect world, you all have like a cycle in DOT where things get proposed maybe in the fall or spring and they're getting implemented hopefully in the same year. But then there's kind of 3 wells that things fall into. Can you explain to us how you all are going about getting the approval or even the inspiration to put down a bike lane? Oh, Zach, you're on mute. There you go.
Yeah, sorry. So yes, we did prep one extra slide to show some of how this was put together. Oh, okay, I'm gonna share it one more time. Okay. So yeah, we tend to put things into 3 different groups of how we get projects going. So the first part is from data. So that's just from crashes or from ridership data, or even more of just like looking at the bike map and knowing that there's a missing connection.
And this is our top section up here, project sources, yeah?
Yes, that's
Okay.
our top section. The other one is community requests, like Calista, and like Calista and like elected officials like Eric Adams himself, if he requested a specific bike lane. And then, but it's also from us doing our own outreach with either street teams, which the real word for that is the street ambassadors. You may see them out there in vests and t-shirts handing out bike lights. And they do surveys. So we use information from that. And then there's certain long-term plans like the one that pops in my head is like Harlem River Bridges, where we do very long outreach processes to try to understand a bunch of corridors at once and a whole neighborhood. And then the other one is response to new opportunities, which is more of like the city bike expansion is a good one. So city bikes go in and then we start trying to make things work with it, or a new park opens up and we want to have a solid bike connection to the new park and want people able to use the new city facilities as quick as possible. But from, I don't know, that's where we were talking right now, right? Do you want me to go through the whole chart? And
Well, so us as the community, right, we are looking at where we want bike lanes to go, or let's say we're riding in our community where we are and just like, all right, we need a bike lane. So if I give you a 311 request, is my singular 311 request really going to make a bike lane happen? Or are y'all looking for a certain number of them? Can you give us some insight, Sean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, definitely send an individual 311 request and, add your name to the chorus. If you are organized and have a group that's also interested in, I think it also, adds a lot of credence to your request to submit as a group. Or, in the example we just heard, like if you can find an elected to help you champion this cause, it also gets you elevated. It kind of gets it to more ears and to us, to DOT. Every single 311 complaint or suggestion gets routed, about bikes gets routed to our group. So we do see every single one. If you're able to, combine your request with a larger group or with an elected, it goes into like a separate kind of like priority part of the system. So, that is like a way to kind of make your way to the top of the list, if you want to think of it that way.
Is that to say when you're referring to a group like Calista did the change.org petition? So a petition would be representative of a group. But
absolutely, a petition, a school, TA. It could be a neighborhood group, a neighborhood garden. Really, like any amalgamation of a community folks.
Okay, and then when you say if you can add a public official to it, that adds. So is that like hand over our petition to a political person to then hand it to you? Is that what that's
I mean, essentially, yeah, it's a little more nuanced. I think you could, take that, say your local council member, you could take your petition to them and with maybe some of the leaders of your group and say, reserve some time, say, council member, we have this idea. We really would like for you to support it. Would you mind writing a letter to DOT on our behalf? Something like that. And that gets the momentum going. And like I said, once you have like, the many voices of a group, and then you are able to find like an elected to champion that cause, I think it really does get things moving a little quicker than if you just sent like a single 311 request.
Got it. And going back to this first column, the data and analysis. So basically, when you notice things are going wrong a lot and you're getting complaints or like you're getting police data that says there's a lot of crashes here. Let's say DOT is working on its own, and it's going to decide to do something. Can we just go back to helping the public conceptualize the schedule on which you all work? Everybody knows there's like tear up the street season and striping season and things like that. But what does a year of completion look like? Or can a bike lane happen in a year? What are the circumstances that make things go quickly, basically?
So, I mean, it is possible for a bike lane to happen in a year. I think sometimes if, one of the things that Zach touched on was if there was a, outreach done in the past and somebody, say a workshop or kind of a longer range plan identified some routes, then, the community is familiar with those, the CB is familiar with those, and it's already been kind of proven that this is a location that's suitable for a bike lane, where people would like to ride, where the connection makes sense. In that case, where the community board and stakeholders in the community are familiar with these projects, it's pretty simple. We develop the design. We bring the idea to the community board and to stakeholders and electeds, make sure that, we tailor it to fit each neighborhood. And then generally, if the community board is on board and the stakeholders and electeds are also happy with the design and agree that it's a benefit, we get the approvals, we pretty much go right into implementation. So we can do all of that kind of like prep work, design and outreach, say during the winter and spring, and then try to give ourselves the summer and fall to implement these things. And that's a best case scenario, when we're talking about just about a year.
Okay. Now, when someone puts in a request for a bike lane, whether it's through 311, like in our case, we had contact at Eric Adams' office who could update us, by contacting DOT on the status of the bike lane. But let's say, someone puts a request in and they don't have that connection yet with an elected official. How would they be able to follow up to see when the bike lane would be implemented, what the status of that design is?
That's a great question. Yeah.
That is a very good question. The best way is to follow up with, usually when you send in a 311 request, you get a letter back. Generally a follow-up to that letter, using 311 system again is the best way to follow up. But I think, not every single request turns into a bike lane. It really is a matter of, are there other requests that match, the requests that came in? Are there crashes that we see in that corridor? Does it fit in a greater context where DOT was already trying to fill in a gap? There's kind of a lot of different influences that may cause one request to kind of move to the top of the list versus another.
So I'm going to share my screen because I want to show everyone the second type of meeting that I've been to is actually y'all's virtual meetings. And it was because I saw a flyer that looked like this. There, right. So I was following the DOT Instagram or Twitter possibly, and I looked up and I saw this template, this flyer that said there's going to be a bike network development meeting. It was going to be virtual, and I participated in this particular meeting. And Calista, you were there too, I think.
Yeah.
And so what it started off like today started off, right? You all gave us a small presentation about vocabulary and the types of lanes, and then it turned into breakout rooms where we kind of just went at it, and we're like, we want a bike lane here and there. So for everybody, like for a while, these meetings are going to continue to be virtual, right? Even community board meetings right now are virtual. So can you tell everybody like what's going on in this meeting and like what are you all really trying to get? Because I know that there were 7 breakout rooms or so in my workshop. And after we kind of all raised our voices, it was like, well, we didn't draw on paper. I don't know who wrote what down. And I'm sure that other people said other things. When I participate in this ongoing, process, what's happening to what I ask of you or what I suggest in terms of where the bike lane goes?
Right. So in this instance, this is kind of the very beginning of the data collection effort, right? So DOT, what they do in advance of this community board meeting is we do our best to cobble together all the existing condition data, right? Where are the existing bike lanes, bus routes, truck routes, schools, other assets that we think would be a draw for cyclists and pedestrians, in the neighborhood. And we bring that information, to the public in this workshop forum. And really what we usually come, to the community to ask is, where would you like to see bike routes? What makes sense? You know your neighborhood better than we do. We don't want to just develop a plan, put it down without any sort of input. Like, we want to understand, what routes do you think are suitable for cycling? Where do you feel unsafe? Where can pedestrian improvements be made? And really come at it like a little more holistically and get your input, on the neighborhood as a whole. And then from there, we take that input back. Generally, the 7 breakout groups, typically they report back so that each of the groups can kind of hear what the other was talking about. I wasn't in this one, so it sounds like maybe that didn't happen here. Courtney, is that right?
Oh, they came back together and they reported out, yes.
Okay, so just a share back of since you are kind of siloed in your own groups, if we did it in person, you can't really hear what the table next to you is doing. Now that we're doing everything digital, obviously you're not in that room. Just to understand that maybe your group was very pro bike lane on this roadway or anti-bike lane on that roadway. But, the group next to you may have thought, well, I think there's a school here and there's merit to building infrastructure on this roadway versus the other. Just so that, your neighbors and other people involved in the conversation understand that it's not just the opinions heard at that one table or that one room, that there is a broad foundation of opinions, and that we want to invite everybody to join in. I think what the benefit for DOT is to hear exactly what residents of the neighborhood think, where they think things could work and where they can't work. We take that information and convert it to some designs and some plans. And generally we'll come back with some designs based on the information that we receive, to try to connect some of these assets that the community has identified as being important.
So let me ask you a question. So there's lots of ways to make decisions, right? So let's say we've got these 7 breakout rooms, they've all given input on what streets they think are the best. Is DOT going with the most popular street? So let's say like 11 people said Avenue B needs to be it. Are you just going based off of our ranking and what seems to be a priority to us? Or are you all like, we're the engineers, we heard you, let's just do it a different way? Like, what's happening when y'all go back?
That's a great question. So it's a little bit of both, right? So what we're first trying to ascertain is, what are we connecting? What are the real draws within the neighborhood that people want to connect? Is it that they want to get to a greenway? Do they want to get to a beach or a school or, a park? So that's the first thing. I think secondly, we have to use some of the engineering aspect of our job to figure out which streets, between these assets that the community is asking to connect, make the most sense. Is there excess capacity on some of these streets where maybe we could take a travel lane and install some bike facilities? Is it better because the volumes are so high on some of these streets that we use some of the lesser streets and kind of, carve a way through a neighborhood? So it's a little bit of both. It's really, more of an art at times, trying to connect neighborhoods and facilities, because our streets are so dynamic and there's so many different needs placed on them. Sometimes they're truck routes or bus routes, and it's really just trying to balance the needs of the neighborhood to make really smart, safe, worthwhile connections.
Cool. So I want to ask some of the obvious burning questions that I hear people, give when they come to meetings or when they think about asking for bike lanes and street improvements. So first off, why don't you all just default to protected bike lanes everywhere if protected bike lanes are going to be most effective at saving cyclist lives?
That's another good question. So, what we're seeing in the data is that there is merit to conventional lanes, right? Any sort of a street with a bike lane and a protected lane is better than a street without. I think our goal is, as we're going into new neighborhoods, we have to be context sensitive. If it makes sense and there's volume and ridership and space, and it's a worthwhile connection, then of course we can jump automatically to a protected bike lane. But I think sometimes what people miss is the protected bike lanes that exist now in other neighborhoods. Those were kind of an incrementalism approach, right? We worked with the community over time to bring them along, to generate the volume, to create a connection. And Ken Avenue, for example, which is a very busy spine two-way bike path on the western edge of Brooklyn, started off as shared lanes, before 2008. And over time, it became a curbside bike lane and then a protected bike lane. It's just
it has evolved.
it's an evolution, right? And I understand people want to get right to the point and get protected bike lanes in, and people think we aren't moving fast enough. And then on the, our job though is there's people on the other side who think we're moving too fast. Oftentimes we're asked, why don't you bypass the community boards and just do what you want to do? And, sometimes we do that. But I think long-term, that's not really going to get us much, that once you kind of burn those bridges, you lose the community. It's better to create partnership and work through these things and bring the community along, and try to get, start somewhere. If we can get to a protected bike lane and that's what fits out of the gate, fantastic. If it has to be a conventional lane first and we generate this volume, generate this demand, and eventually work our way up to something a little more robust, then that works too. But I think the goal is that we're able to work with these communities and come back again and again, build trust so that they understand that, this is a network perspective, a network that we're trying to build out. We don't want to come here, just drop a protected bike lane, upset everybody, and then not be able to come back for a couple of years. That doesn't benefit anybody.
Speaking of community boards, so community boards are advisory, right?
They are, absolutely.
Power over projects. So interestingly enough, so I'm a community member of my Brooklyn CB9 community board, transportation committee. And about 3 years ago, DOT came and presented an extension to the bike path on Franklin Avenue. So in case anyone didn't already realize, Franklin Avenue has a bike lane, but it abruptly ends at Empire. So what they were doing was presenting to us a possibility to extend it Eastern Parkway. They wanted to extend it south of Eastern Parkway and finish at Empire Boulevard. And when they presented this to our community board 9 transportation committee, there were a couple pro-parking, anti-biking members who were very vocal about not wanting that bike lane. Even though there were some of us there that were vocally in support of it, these two people, individuals, were shouting and very irate about it. So DOT went through with the pedestrian fixes that they were presenting, but they totally omitted the bike lane after all, just because of those two irate individuals. And I'm sure this happens at many community boards across the city.
Certainly.
So the question is, and actually it's more of a statement too, is that a lot of the community boards are not reflective of the community. A lot of the members on there are more privileged than, the average resident. They might own a car, they might even be homeowners, but at the end of the day, they, are just there to preserve whatever it is they're trying to preserve, whether it's parking or whatever else. So I'm commending you guys for actually doing something like this workshop for CB17, because it wasn't just for the community board, it was open to everyone. But how much does the community board influence your decision-making process when you present something to them? And, let's say the members there are totally against it. Do you guys take into consideration that they are not reflecting the majority of their neighborhood most of the time?
And
yes,
I want
absolutely.
to add to that. I want to add to that when you answer, Sean. And if they do, if a community board resists a bike lane, how many times is DOT willing to go back and represent to them and rework it to get their approval?
Okay, so I'll answer the last question first. I think, sorry about that. I just got a call. I think we're willing to rework endlessly. I mean, we're still working on projects from like 5 years ago, 10 years ago that we're kind of on the back burner that we're always willing to rework. So the thing is, as long as there are people in the community that would like to see a connection made and there is a worthwhile connection to be made, the project doesn't die. Like we'll continue to work with the community members. Hopefully it can get, championed by an elected or electeds change, community boards start to evolve. So ideally we can come to some sort of solution eventually. Calista, back to your first question. That's a great point. I think that comes up a lot these days. And I think we're aware, and I'll be candid here with you guys. We're aware that not every, community board is representative, of its neighborhood. I think we have, and we do, roll boards is what we call it at times. But also what happens once we go to a community board and we kind of, experience what you described, and it happens all throughout the city. Generally what DOT does is our intergov folks start to talk to all the other electeds, the council members, the assembly members, the state senators in the area. And if the electeds, support us and are kind of, think that we're working towards something in the right way, that's when we're more inclined to roll the community board. But at other times, if the electeds are also staunchly against us and the community board is against us, then it becomes a question of political will. And that's where it kind of leaves the, can we or can't we? It kind of goes up into this political realm that us as planners have less influence over, unfortunately.
I will add, I was going to say, off of what Sean's saying about it going up into political, what's the right word? Like middle ground, I don't know.
Melee.
Yeah, we have, I think some of the workshops are maybe an illustration of the tools we have to make sure that doesn't happen, which is like when you're asking why do we have the workshop, like part of the reason is so that we don't have a room of people just saying, hey, you're taking away our parking. Like we want to find, the workshop helps us pull people together who do want change and to have like multiple faces say that and to point to various streets and things like that, like in just a very general picture, it's very helpful to trying to help change our streets. We also have the street ambassadors, which is like another thing we do. Like we'll send out surveying so that we don't just have the community board members saying that they hate our project, that we have a survey that says people say that they want safer streets and things like that. Like, and that takes more time. And I think we're still trying to improve that process too, but it's
so I just saw that you all, well, I guess you all put it out and then El Barrio Bike shared it. I'm going to pull it up on my phone. So it says here that there's a pop-up outreach station happening Monday, May 3rd at the Charles Young Playground in Harlem. and you're surveying the residents for their experience on biking. So would this be one of the street ambassador build up to maybe making something happen on Malcolm X, I guess?
That's exactly it. That's a bike month event, and that is putting out feelers. And if I could piggyback on what Zach said, that is the workshops is exactly why we do that kind of stuff. Those type of outreach events, Courtney, that you just mentioned, is when we go to the community board and, you know, the people on the board say, our community doesn't want this. And we can turn to a workshop and say, actually, 80 people came and 70 of them said they want this here. So, you know, it gives a leg to stand on versus, you know, going in without any of that context that the neighborhood, that the community does want some of these improvements that we're proposing.
I've got two questions regarding more about the community board's involvement, right? So my understanding is, it seems like no matter what you all do, the community board always comes back with, we need more proof. We need more proof. What kind of proof is it that they're ultimately pretending? What is it that they're ultimately saying that they're looking for? Like, what's the unequivocal truth that the people on this call, you know, can bring to you all, to bring to them, to be like, we want it. Everybody wants it. Like, make it happen.
I honestly, like, to show up, and when they say that, you raise your hand and say, that's not true. We do want this. And I know that's hard. Not everyone has time to make it to community boards. But, you know, write your electeds so that they know, and that when because they, you know, when their member, someone from their staff attends all these community boards, and if you've made it aware to them, then they will relay, actually, community does want this. I think the more voices that add to the chorus of, we want this, this is a benefit to the neighborhood, the better. And the naysayers, you know, who are more concerned about, you know, free parking, will have less of a leg to stand on.
Now, Sean, does it?
Go ahead, Calista, sorry.
Sean, does it, like, let's just say you have an absent city council member and for your district, or, you know, let's just say they're pro car. Does it help then to maybe go to the state level, to your assembly member or to your state senator? Does their support carry some weight?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you're represented by at least 3 levels of government, like here in the city. So I would just go, like, appeal to the next level and try to, you know, galvanize a good conversation there. If your, like, direct, you know, council member is not helping.
Awesome.
Cool. So my other question about CBs, and this is not, I guess it's not so much directly about the CBs, but going back to my experience with the virtual workshop, right? In my small group, there are about 4 or 5 of us. And Calista, I think this was also something that you were saying was happening in your group. Some of the people, as we're getting into these new neighborhoods, we were working on East Flatbush, are coming to the table kind of already defeated with the idea that the car culture is too deep in this neighborhood. Like, they're never going to approve it. But it's just like, they came to the workshop to give input, but they're also talking against themselves. I don't know. It just seems like some kind of, like, psychological whirlwind. Like, how can we reach or encourage those people, I guess, to believe that this is a worthwhile process?
I think I guess it's on all of us to try to be very positive in this time. Like, I know when I think of a workshop, or like if we even do something like very internal, I always am like, throw down all your ideas on the paper, and like, we'll have to try to be a little bit more logical later, but like, let's just like throw up all over the page and see what we know. Just put as much data as you can and we'll look over it. But I think it is good maybe to get people to understand that we have a really long-term goal of making bicycling in the city more comfortable for everyone and getting more people to bike. And like, it's tough to think about. Like, I'm sure Sean and I have both had the same internal, like, conflict on whether enough is going on or whether what we're doing is the right thing. But at the end of the day, we're just trying to do more and more. And just because we don't do a street 1 year doesn't mean that we won't do it in the next 2 years, 3 years, 10 years. I'm sure there's examples of it. Like, I'm sure people have been looking at 4th Avenue in Brooklyn for decades and thinking that there should be bike lanes on it. So, but now they're there, and you could ride them like all the way to Bay Ridge. So it's a long process, but it's sometimes good to reflect and
right.
it.
So, I mean, same with like Crescent Street in Astoria. I mean, I think that lane has been talked about for probably 10 plus years. And it seemed impossible until it wasn't. And then it went in last year, and now it's this great connection, to the Queensboro Bridge. So I know sometimes it may seem like the odds are stacked against you, but, the city is trending in the right direction, and we are, trying to get out as much as we can and identify as many routes as we can and build this network out citywide.
Cool. Speaking of more of what we should ask for when we're in these meetings, right? You all showed us the bike lanes and the bike lane types, and now we have the vocabulary for it. But you all gave me some insight into how powerful it is to specificity over generality. Like maybe sometimes asking for a bike lane is not the right solution, because you all are engineers, you all have a lot of tools in your bag. So can you inform the public, like, what you all's thought process is? Like, if I say I want a bike lane on Willoughby Avenue, period, what happens in DOT? And if that's not the right thing, then what happens from there?
So I think being able to describe the connections that you want to make on a grander scale, I think is easier from our perspective, right? If you put all your chips on Willoughby and we analyze Willoughby, and for whatever reason it does or doesn't work, let's just say it doesn't work, then it kind of is a loss. But if you say, actually, I want to connect from, Park Slope to X, then there are several routes that we can investigate, and it kind of broadens our scope and broadens our ability to make the connection that's being requested. So I think by, maybe broadening or being more specific about the connections you want to make versus the street you want to make it on, gives DOT and us a few more options to look at different routes to get you there.
Okay. So the way I interpret that is basically DOT, we should remember that DOT is government. And if we ask for a specific thing, that's the specific thing you'll react to. Versus if we're more general, it kind of gives you all, I think you all described it as an art earlier. Like, if we give you a general objective, then you all can art your way into helping us get there. Is that accurate?
Right. It provides a little more flexibility in creating the connection, versus if we're asked to, just look at one street and it doesn't work, then we have to go back to the drawing board, versus if we're able to start by casting a wider net and looking at several connections, then we can kind of refine it down to the best connection.
Got you.
Is it helpful?
Funny.
Is it helpful for like residents to request, let's just say, like with this CB17 network, everyone identified the major arterials as priorities as far as what they want a bike lane on, to Linden, Kings Highway, and also Remsen, for example. Would it be helpful for us to suggest like 3 specific streets? Because I'm just curious if it would take DOT longer to figure out a connection between Canarsie Park and say, some other part of the neighborhood, or Flatbush Avenue, for example. Maybe it might take longer for you guys to figure that out, rather than us just being specific with maybe 3 options versus 1 option.
3 options is definitely helpful. I think those larger, more dynamic roadways, obviously take a lot more data collection, a lot more analysis to understand, where we could potentially fit something in. But yeah, I think, more options is better than fewer. And like I said, you guys know your neighborhood better than we do. So if there are 3 connections that you think are all equal and will get you where you need to go, I think DOT, is better looking at a handful versus just kind of putting all their eggs in one basket.
And even just saying all the arterials is a theme kind of in itself. And I think something that we're trying to push harder and harder is that people want to be on the main road on their bike, getting to the shops, getting to like the major destinations. So like that's still powerful to point out those specific streets that are problems. But to back to what Sean's point is, we want you there for the journey of like all the bike lanes in your neighborhood, not just like the one specific street that we have to battle over with the community board. Like we want to put them all over the place in as many places as possible.
I have okay, I'm gonna smash it all together. It's gonna work. Okay, so earlier you all said that, and we're gonna start getting toward questions about these processes from the participants on the call very soon. But you all said that the further out we get into the outer boroughs, it seems like things get more complex. And it would be, we can't not discuss the fact that there's a correlation between, the reason why that is because all the highways are out there, they're pushed into, especially the Bronx, is really hard to not hit a highway. And, a lot more of the manufacturing was out that way or toward the edges of the city. And because of segregation and things, people of color have been pushed economically to those areas. So we're dealing with complex areas that also have the majority of the city's people of color living in it. So if it's more complex, should we expect that it's going to take longer in these neighborhoods to get an answer or configuration for the bike lanes? I mean, we already have been delayed in getting, the proper investments overall. So we're finally getting out there. But now that we're in these triangulated streets and weird configurations and highways and warehouses and stuff like that, is it reasonable that we should also expect the bike lane process to take longer out there? Like East Brooklyn, South Bronx, wherever.
I hope I didn't scare you by saying the complex part too much.
You said it, and I was like,
it
is so complex, socially, economically, urban planning wise.
I've been doing a lot of work in the Bronx, and we come across these intersections that have like
wild 5
or 6 legs coming off of them, and it's like, has anyone sat here and tried to design this? And the answer is like, no. Like the drawings from like 30 years ago.
Is it Robert?
Robert Moses, damn you.
Yeah. So, but I think you should. Maybe Sean will give a better program answer, but we can do the work. It does take more time on our end, but like that's our problem, that we have to sit there and design it and try to look at the traffic signal that has like, I don't know how.
So it gets a little tougher, right? Car ownership goes up, density is a little lower at times. I think these types of some of the designs that are kind of ubiquitous, that people see all over the place in, say, Manhattan, Brooklyn, are newer to some of the neighborhoods that are a little further out. So it kind of goes back to that, bringing them along, I guess educating people that like these can work, and that, you don't have to be so concerned about parking or double parking or, traffic or impacts to your commute, that, the streets out here are dynamic. There are a lot of needs, but there is space for bikes. And I think it's that conversation that we're working on now. And hopefully once that gets rolling, that delay that you mentioned, Courtney, will significantly reduce. It's just a matter of kind of getting to that, just getting to the top of the hill, everyone understanding that there is a benefit here, not only in safety, not only to connectivity, but that the streets can work for everyone.
Cheers. So let's end our section before we ask question and answers with feedback from you, Zach and Sean. Zach, you worked on Sunset Park. Sean, you've worked on the Green Wave for Brooklyn, some connectors. If there was an ideal level of preparation that the public could bring to you when they come to the workshops, right? So, hi, perfect citizen, got all the whatever you need. What is it that they / the people on the Zoom, what should they come to the table with? How can they best prepare themselves? And I know, Calista, you had a resource to share too about something you like to use to map out intersections. But let's hear from Zach and Sean first.
I gotta think about this a little bit. I think them being there is really the top thing. Being there and like knowing their neighborhood and saying that I've lived in this neighborhood, that they love biking or whatever it is. I personally like the personal stories, because like I could stand up there as the engineer and planner and be like, well, the street's 30 feet wide and we could put a bike lane here. But I can't say like, hey, I bring my kid to school every day and I almost get hit by a car. I can't really say that the same way that a resident can. So those stories from your neighborhood and your understanding and your stake in it that's what sort of reaches the hearts of everyone around you, I think, and it helps us gain support and makes it a lot harder to end up not installing a bike lane. Like once we have people saying like, hey, we're all, once everyone speaks from their hearts and has their real experiences, it makes it much harder for any politician or community board to say no. And it gives us a lot of cannon fodder to say why we're doing a project.
And I know politicians are real good at like capturing those stories and just like reworking them. Does DOT also like record these testimonies and refer back to them when they make their plans? Yeah, Sean?
Yes. Okay. So the digital, workshops that we have now, that we're doing now, during COVID are all recorded. And previously when we were doing workshops in person or, community board meetings in person, there are recorders at every table, and generally we have a set of questions that we're going through, and we have, we'll compare the answers across, all the different folks that were present.
I just wanted to ask. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Calista.
Oh, no, if you wanted to ask.
I just wanted to ask, Sean, did you have any opinions on the perfect
Yes,
resident?
I did. Thank you for coming back to me.
Okay,
and that
great.
was well said, Zach. I'll echo what Zach said. Just showing up is number one. Like, people have an inherent understanding of their communities, of the streets that they walk every day, more than we could ever hope to have. So just being there, lending your voice to whatever conversation is happening. I think the other half would be come with, ask for the moon and stars. Think big, ask big. As presenters or as folks who are at these tables occasionally, we want you to ask the big questions, and we can explain why maybe, a new stadium or whatever the question is, or a parking garage or whatever the question is impossible. But, think big, but also be ready to help us with like the incremental approach. What do you think would make sense now and get us to that ultimate goal? And be okay, understanding that it is a process, and that things don't start fully done. It is a process that has to be slowly built out, and step by step, I think we'll get to the goal that most people are searching for.
So show up with a long-term mentality as well, right?
Yeah.
And I just wanted to mention too that of course you guys are the experts, you guys are the engineers, you went to school for it. But if what one of my friends and I did when we were first suggesting the Flatbush bike lane is that we created something on Street Mix, which is a site that you can use to play around with the measurements, and you can add a bike lane in. It's a lot of fun. I'm not saying that DOT is going to go through with it, what you suggest, but it may also be helpful to bring that up as well. And you guys can let me know like how helpful it is for like some regular old folks to like.
Yeah, I love it. Be proactive. Like the easier you can make your vision, the easier you can make us see your vision, the better. I think Street Mix is a fantastic tool. We use a variation of it at DOT to create our cross section. So I think that's a great suggestion.
And I shared it in the chat, guys, for anyone who's interested in learning more about it or using it.
So I'm sharing my screen right now because I also wanted to let the folks on the Zoom know that you can enhance your personal understanding. When Sean says dream big, bring all of your ideas to the table, you can learn what more is possible other than just a bike lane, right? Because the streets get street treatments, and a bike lane is one element of how we can change the street to make it safer. But you might have been walking around your neighborhood and noticed all these like spray paint markings at the corners where it's saying, you know, we're going to push out this corner and we're going to daylight it. We're going to put XYZ thing in. And those are also options that help support your bike lane. So like if you don't get a protected bike lane like you want, maybe it's because you didn't absolutely need the protected bike lane, but maybe a conventional lane plus some other elements on the street. So if you go to nyc.gov/bikes, that's New York City's bike page, right? All the bike unit things are there. And they introduced me to this current bicycle routes project. And so let me take a step back. So when you land, it'll look like this here, right? So you go down to, where did it go? Building bike lanes, is it? Right, building bike lane section, and then learn more about current bicycle route projects. And in this section is all of the bike lanes that are being proposed, right? Or presently worked on as well. And it's the presentations that DOT has been making. And they have all the technical nerd stuff that you ever will want or need to know. So we're talking about Brownsville, East New York, and East Flatbush. Well, here's Brownsville bicycle and pedestrian improvements proposals right here. And if you click on it, it gives you the PDF, and you can scroll through and see exactly when it was, you know, presented, April 8th, not so long ago. You can see why there's a problem, little maps, and then you can see all of their little plans inside of here, right? So cross sections of the street, what it might look like in one configuration or the other. You can pick up vocabulary here. You can learn other things to propose other than the bike lanes. And so if you want to be a non-accredited urban planner, but excellent at transportation, you know, this would be a great place to get your ammo. So I just wanted to share that. So it's nyc.gov/bikes, and then go to the current bicycle projects. So I want to now
Can I
go
throw in
over to
something
some
else,
of our
Courtney,
questions.
real quick?
Yeah, go ahead, Zach. What's up?
In the same vein of those presentations, if you really want to like look into all the technical material, I love the NACTO site,
Yes, I mentioned
NACTO.
that to someone.
They have a lot of street design stuff. If you're like trying to get ideas and diagrams, they have a great site for what people are doing all over America. There's a lot of New York City examples, so there's you feel proud of your city.
Thank you very much. Yeah, everybody does look to, as much as people complain that we don't have a bike lane on every street, which is ideal, right? You know, we still are leading a lot of the nation with what we got. Like, believe me.
We would sell more bike infrastructure than any other city. Yeah.
So there you go. All right, so I'm going to start scrolling into questions. Voice of assistance, Kristen, if you've seen anything particularly interested in the chat box, let me know. But I did just see one from Dale that I think is a really great question related to outreach. And then I think someone else, Luke, has a question. Luke, send me your question, please. All right, so Dale asks, or states and then asks, delivery workers are now one of the biggest users of the bike lanes and are especially vulnerable and depend on safe bike lanes for livelihood and separate spaces away from pedestrians to reduce conflicts. But they often don't have time to show up to community board meetings, absolutely, and they need safe lanes outside of their own CBs anyway. How is DOT taking their needs into account, and how can advocates better include needs in our appeals? Talking about the working cyclist population, who are often, you know, their vulnerability also all comes from oftentimes being undocumented persons as well. So how are we accommodating and receiving info from them?
That's a great question. So what we do for a lot of these workshops or you know, outreach endeavors is we do try to create you know, websites or like handouts with emails, so that with an email connection, so that we can hand these out to people as they pass by, or someone could take it for somebody who's not able to show up, or, you know, who thinks they would benefit from you know, this type of design or project and pass it along to some so that they can have their voice heard, so they can input what they think should happen on these streets. Since they can't be at that place at that time.
Now, Sean, are these literatures that you're passing out, are they in, the respective languages of some of these delivery cyclists? Because a lot of them are, they speak different languages, especially indigenous languages, which maybe.
Yes, absolutely. Great question. Also, we do have, when we send our ambassadors out, they do have several different languages depending on which neighborhood that they're going to. So those are available.
Great.
Cool. My other question is, other than just having the website up, because there's a difference between having, the receptacle, but then how do we get the people to that portal? Are there pop-ups where the street team is dedicated to this kind of outreach with interacting with the working cyclists?
Yes, so there are pop-ups where we'll show up with maps and we can kind of take the information there, or intercept surveys, so we can ask the questions, in person. So I think that's probably the best way that we have right now to collect data for folks that can't make it into like a formal workshop or in the evening.
Cool, good to know. All right, question from Luke involves federal stuffs. So if a street doesn't meet a federal minimums to install traffic devices, is DOT able to override that if there's enough political will? I feel like federal always trumps everything.
Zach, you want to take a shot, or you want me to answer this one?
To be real, I think yes. I think there are weird instances where there's enough political will to do, but it's not someone sending a 311 email in. It means it means the mayor or someone says that we have to do something regardless of what we're technically allowed to do. Like the really big one, I don't know if this is recognized, this is meaning this, but the big one is adding in a traffic signal places, and we always have to follow the guidelines exactly, but there's every once in a while something happens and it ends up where we're able to install something because there's so much political will somewhere and so much money is getting funded towards a project, but it's gigantic.
Right. And to add on to that, New York is also, a pretty dynamic city. And a lot of these thresholds that were created by the, FHWA are kind of for, smaller cities. So sometimes there is some leeway there where we are dealing with volumes and pedestrians and interactions and, angles of, like Zach was saying, 6-legged intersections where there is space for us to, to take some license.
But that's hard for us to do too. We end up arguing with people about trying to convince them to break the federal guidelines also. So we're with you.
Doesn't sound like an easy battle. But thanks for making things safer despite the feds. There was an earlier comment and I'll ask the question. So someone commented that if there's room for parking, there's room for a protected bike lane. So I would assume that would mean flipping just the orientation of where the bike lane is to the curb and pushing the cars out into the street. Is that something that you all agree with, or why don't you agree with that?
So the question is, if there's parking, that means there's also room for a protected bike lane?
Right. So basically, if you can put a conventional lane on the inside near moving traffic.
Oh, got it.
Then you could technically put that bike lane next to the curb and push the parking out to be closer to the traffic instead. So what's your feedback on that?
So they're on the right track, but that's not exactly true. The problem with, so generally a bike lane on the outside of a car is 5 feet. If you put that space adjacent to the curb, the problem is the cyclist would be traveling through the door zone. So when the driver gets out of the car or the passenger gets out of the car and the door flies open, generally you try to give 3 feet there, and then still have at least 4 feet left over. In that instance, there'd only be 2 feet, and it would be too tight, honestly, for us to deem it safe for cyclists to move through there at a traditional pace with the possibility of a door swinging open and them hitting it.
But a lot of the conventional lanes are almost right up against the car door and definitely within the zone. So how do you justify that?
So the conventional lanes there, if a person does open a door, there is space in the adjacent travel lane, right? At like another 3 feet. But if you're between the curb and the door, you don't really have like an exit route or a way to get away. You're confined by the curb.
Gotcha. Okay. We've got a question. Chris, I will read it for you. You don't have to do it. So to date, the conversation on bike lanes has focused almost exclusively on neighborhoods. Chris believes he's hearing very little system level conversation about the origins, destinations, routes across multiple neighborhoods. Is DOT looking at a system level metric? Oh, you sound fancy. System level metrics that can get them out of neighborhood by neighborhood type of model. So basically, I think he's asking, it seems like we're going by the zip codes and CBs and stuff. Like, why are we doing it little plots at a time instead of just massive, I guess, geographically oriented things?
Yeah, so I think that he's referring, maybe at the beginning, Zach talked about our Greenway plan, which is our citywide approach. It does have where we want to go as a network, as 5 boroughs, like what's important. I don't know if you could pull that back up again, Zach, but that is a guiding document for us. And those are, there's not specific streets listed on that document. They're goals of, like we were talking about earlier, neighborhoods and locations that we want to connect. But that is our overarching kind of citywide goal. There it is.
Yeah.
Right. So that's like the interconnected, multi-neighborhood approach that I think the person was asking about.
Data-wise, I feel like that's the closest thing we have maybe is like the city bike data, which is fairly skewed because those are going to stations and you got to pay for city bike. So that's a certain cyclist type. But we do have some other data sources that we're like learning how to use, but we haven't used them to figure out full like cyclist geographic routing all over the city. It's a good point. I think it'd be neat. There is like the Strava map of where
The
people
heat maps.
That heat
I mean, there
map.
aren't the bike counting machines. I mean, I know there's some at the bridges, but maybe DOT can put some temporary ones and install them on different major roads around the city.
Yeah, we do have a lot of a lot is perspective, but we were adding more and more counters all over the city. Like the big ones are the bridges. There's a few on greenways. I think every year we do a count. Is it 59th Street, Sean? Is that what it is?
60th, yeah.
60th
Screen
Street.
line counts, yeah.
Yeah, we do a screen line count of people going into central Manhattan, and we're finding more and more ways to do that. I think it's a good question on macro level, like bicycle movements across the city.
Yeah, I feel like Manhattan's okay. Like it's time to stop. I mean, it's the most gridded, right? Consistently gridded borough. It's already got the majority of bike lanes outside of the like newly gentrified areas
And bike share.
And bike share. Like they've got all the things. I just feel like it would be fine to spend time just on the outer boroughs and not even the most populous, or not most populous, most popular parts, right? Because we're talking again about our people of color. We're talking about those working cyclists. They're living on the edges. And I would love to see connectors on those streets, because a lot of people, and I mean, Manhattan, of course, has a lot more of affluent people who have more time on their hands to participate with you guys. Mm-hmm. I know that you probably got names that always show up on every campaign that ever will be in Manhattan because they got all the time in the world. I just want things to be hugely more accessible. And and I don't know how much innovation you got in your belt for retooling your systems, but I surely hope that today's class helps people understand that it's achievable and there's different ways to get involved. But whew, it's okay to
Well,
leave Manhattan alone.
well said.
Sorry.
I would love to reconvene with this group in 6 months. I think we have some big things planned this year for Queens and Bronx and Brooklyn. So, stay tuned, and I'd love to have this conversation again in 6 months or so.
Yeah, and everybody, I showed you all what the little templates look like. I'll go back and show you again. When you see that flyer, that is your call to action, okay? We do have a great question from Doug because the streets master plan did get passed, meaning that, we got to commit a certain amount of miles of bike lanes to get done in a certain amount of time. So Doug asked, how will the streets master plan, which is set to go in effect next year, change the way that DOT approaches community boards? Does it become less project-based, or will there be more workshops to consider larger networks?
So it's going to be both. It's going to be workshops to consider these larger connections that we need to make. And then out of those workshops will come the projects that still will go through the traditional SIP process. I think what's going to be transformative about this plan is that it will speak to what the previous person asked about, was connecting neighborhoods and boroughs instead of just talking about street by street. And having that perspective, I think, will go a long way to help us pitch these as we approach electeds and community boards, and going through the traditional channels of getting these lanes in.
Cool. Oh wait, there are more little messages. Like, we ran out of questions.
Oh no, there's more.
Oh, there's more. Shortest time period. What is the shortest time period you've seen a bike lane go from being advocated for to built? And are there any lessons that the participants can learn about helping expedite their bike lanes?
I'm sorry, I missed the first half of the question, if you wouldn't mind.
What's the shortest time period you've seen a bike lane go in? So from, I guess, either your data, from an event, whatever.
I think a year is usually the fastest. I think, I think you asked earlier, I think maybe before everyone joined the conversation, a traditional SIP, street improvement project, can take anywhere from 1 to 3 years. That's where we use our in-house resources, concrete, paint, Jersey barriers, moving like some signals. The capital projects, which we have listed on our website as well, are a little more involved, much more expensive, and give us greater license to move catchment basins or sewer drains, to move lights, to build large swaths of concrete, and really like reconstruct an entire roadway. And those take generally, in my experience, 4 to 7 years. And I have a capital project that was just built that took 10 years. So those are much longer term, much more involved. They go through a completely different process. The SIP projects, which is primarily what Zach and I work on, are these shorter term projects that can deliver safety to the streets in a much faster turnaround. Again, typically 1 to 3 years.
And you mentioned the phrase capital projects. What's a capital project versus a bike lane and pedestrian project? Or do they go together, or are they a category?
Yeah, so capital projects can include bicycle and pedestrian improvements, but usually in a capital project, you're rebuilding the entire roadway starting underground. So you realign the sewers, everything gets upgraded. You can move the curbs if you want. You can move the street lights. Really it's a carte blanche to redesign the entire street. They're usually much smaller projects because they're so resource intensive. The SIP program, the kind of bike lane SIPs or safety improvement SIPs that we work on, the curbs are set. We kind of have to retrofit what's there. All we can change is the surface. So small concrete changes, markings changes, and just kind of realigning the street to work better and be safer.
Okay, that's I like that. Like, it's either underground or surface. Got it.
Oh, my phone died.
Oh, yeah. Calista?
Oh no,
what else is? No, I was just asking. You got anything else that's percolating in your mind, or like points you want to make? We're 5 minutes to end, so put it out there if you want it out there.
Well, I just want to thank you for inviting me to speak, and thank you, Sean and Zach, for coming on and sharing all of this knowledge. This was really helpful, and I just want to let everyone know that the process is long, but the key is to be patient and just to remain tenacious and continue to push for whatever bike lane or project that you are hoping to bring into fruition. And it's also really important that our voices are heard on the community board level. So if you have the time and you're able to, definitely become involved in your local community board. Even if you don't want to join as a board member, you can do what I do, which is I am a community member on my transportation committee. So I mean, every community board might be different, but I know on mine's, I have voting power. So if DOT, brings a presentation, my voice will matter. Even though we don't have veto power, reminder again, community boards do not have veto power. As Sean mentioned earlier, they do play a role in influencing a project and how it gets implemented. So if your voices are what's heard, in addition to the loudest ones that are usually opposed, it will really make a difference.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said. Thank you for championing Flatbush Ave, by the way. That was no easy feat,
Yes.
and I hope you're happy with the product now. I
Very
really enjoy riding
yes,
it. Yeah.
Thank you. And I also want to just add, if anybody wants to, get more involved with advocacy in general, I'll put my colleague and friend Dulcie's contact. She gave me permission to do so, to share it with you guys. If you are interested in pursuing a bike lane in your neighborhood and you want to know how to get started, or maybe you want some additional assistance, maybe get connected with others who are interested in your neighborhood, she's a great resource, and she was really helpful to our Flatbush campaign. And I'll put her contact here. She's with Transpo.
Wonderful. So it sounds like, if I can just bring back some kind of summarizing points, change is possible. We have to have hope, it sounds like, but we just have to know what a realistic time frame could possibly be. The ideal situation is going to be a year. Ideal, nothing's wrong, CB is acting all right, but it is best to come to the table, I guess, with a sense of devotion. I guess what I would describe it as. I am devoted to getting a project done that makes, cycling safer for myself and for my neighbors, that's going to connect and be critical. I think if you can motivate yourself, and this is totally why I'm bike mayor, like, my motivation for spending the time making these programs and pulling my hair out, even though it's only 2 inches long, is what will come of someone else's, life and longevity and ease and happiness if I can stick with this project, So come in with a sense of devotion, know that it's not going to be necessarily easy. You now know a little bit more about the vocabulary, so you can, wheel and deal with these words. You now have a toolbox to go to nyc.gov/bikes and look at the current projects and, learn about your particular project that's going down and the details there, but also being able to absorb some of the resources to help you be a more powerful, influential speaker. You now know that it's best, if you're going to try to request a bike lane, to already build the momentum when you come to the table. So that's 311 as an individual, but we've been told, obviously this is true of life, get better as a group, and even better as with a politician to be a cherry on top. If your particular representative isn't acting right, go above them, go to the assembly person, go to whomever will help throw their weight behind it, and I be ready to spar with these CBs. Like, until we can remove community boards from this process, which I personally think community boards should not have any input on life-saving devices. They are not engineers, and I think that everybody who doesn't like bike doesn't know how to ride a bike. Prove me wrong. But yeah, just be ready to stick with it is really the takeaway from this. So, Zach, you got anything to add before we tune out?
That's really great seeing all these questions and interest.
Yeah, absolutely. Are we able to share those 4 slides with people? I can certainly email them to the registration list. Is that cool with you all?
Yes, should be good.
Sweet. Okay, well, to that end, thank you all so much. This is
Thank
super
you for
valuable.
organizing and putting this together.
Thank you.
I messed up and didn't record like the first 11 minutes, but I will put what I do have on the internet. I'm gonna put it on YouTube. It's May, y'all. So this weekend is May. It's Bike Month. Get out, ride your bikes as much as possible. That is the tradition, but also DOT and mostly every bike organization has a few events that they like to try to push into the month. I personally am going to kick off the month with a bike ride with our NYC Parks Commissioner, Mitch Silver, who's outgoing but did a phenomenal job at using equity to prioritize what parks got funded for redevelopment. And so that's going to be on Saturday morning, 9 a.m. in Harlem, going to Harlem and the Bronx in like a 7-mile loop. You can find that information. There's like 5 more spots. You can find that information at the same place that you found this registration information. That's my linktree.com/thebrownbikegirl. And DOT, what other pop-up events you all have that you want people to come to?
Omar, this is you.
Yeah, Omar's been in the
unmute
background,
you.
but he.
You're unmuted, Omar. Go ahead.
I sent the link in the chat. We do have an events page if you'd like to look at it in the future. Bike Month, we have a ride this Sunday with Good Co Ride Club.
Okay.
It's at the Brownsville Recreation Center, and that'll help us kick off Bike Month.
Sweet. Sweet, sweet, sweet. And if you don't know, also, I said that bike education is part of my Bike Mayor platform. Every 4th Wednesday of every month of the year, I do bike education at 6 p.m. on that Wednesday. Just had Urban Road School class yesterday. Our bike club of the month was Nightcap, and they brought a bunch of their members, family, and friends to learn how to be safer cyclists. Next month, I alternate back and forth with these 2 classes. Next month will be commute and carry class, because cycling is not all recreational. Sometimes cycling is functional, and that is totally fine. So learning how to pack your bike with the right equipment and set it up to carry things, grocery, laundry, volunteer, work, whatever it is that you need to do to make that bicycle machine work for you, is what we'll be talking about. So same place, linktree.com/thebrownbikegirl. All my events and links, include donation links, are available there. And that's it. Okay, that is it. I appreciate every single one of you, both of the participants and my wonderful panelists. This has been fun.
Definitely.
Thank you.
All right, y'all.
Yeah,
And
thanks.
huge thanks to Kristen for moderating and letting everybody in out of the waiting room. I'm going to say good night.
Good night, guys.
Bye.
Bye.